Hi friends, Krista here. Thank you so much for stopping by Books and Jams today. I'm so glad that you are here for one of my favorite videos to film every year, the mid-year book freakout tag. Like I said, this is one of my favorite videos to film every year. I've listed down below the last 4 or 5 years and the links to those videos if you want to go back and watch my videos from previous years if you're newer around here. But I'm sure you're pretty familiar with this tag. I'm sure you've seen a lot of people already do it this year. We're going to dive right in with a doozy of a question. And I'm so bummed because I just started filming this and I got all the way through raving about this book and realized I had not pushed start on my phone. But so far this year, I have read 86 books from what I can gather, and 23 of them were 5-star reads. So I really have been having a fantastic reading year. I'm so pleased that I have so many 5 stars, but one that stands out in my mind as a favorite so far this year is Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi. I don't remember a lot of people talking about this book. I read it because one of my patrons recommended it to me earlier this year, and I'm so glad that I read it. If you like Khaled Hosseini's books about Afghanistan, in particular women in Afghanistan, I feel like you would really like this book. In it, we follow a young girl who in the 1970s is loving her home life. She kind of is living a life of privilege in Afghanistan. Her dad works with the president at the time. But then one day the Soviet coup happens. Communist soldiers take over and actually kill almost everybody in the palace. She is hidden away and then whisked out of the palace and then whisked out of the country, snuck out of the country, and spends her teenage and 20s in the United States. So we see her life in the United States and different foster homes that she's a part of, and it's kind of horrible for a lot of that time. But then as a young adult, she wants to go back to Afghanistan and reconnect with her life there, and she wants to just get some closure for all of these events that happened. We as readers get to see Afghanistan kind of in its glory days before any of this happened, and how beautiful of a country it was and how much the people loved their country. I'm sure that's like kind of one-sided, but then we see the Soviets take over and what that is like. And then when she returns to Afghanistan as an adult, the Taliban is in control, and it's a totally different country than she ever knew as a kid. I just thought it was so interesting to learn about Afghanistan through the eyes of this one woman's story. I really loved that. I thought the writing was beautiful. I was swept up in this story, and I'm so thankful that I had to read it as a patron pick. It has become a favorite of mine, and definitely one that I would love to have on my shelves someday, and definitely a book that I would recommend to a lot of people. There are some difficult parts of it, but it was very interesting. Oh man, I loved it. I'm not going to talk about all the books quite as lengthily. That one just deserved a little moment in the spotlight because I just loved it so much. Number 2 is your favorite sequel from this year. I've not been doing great in reading sequels, but one series that I am continuing to make my way through is The Keeper of the Lost Cities. This is actually book 7, but I'm going to say book 6 is a favorite sequel so far this year because it is one of my favorites so far. I've read 7 of them. 2, 3, and 6 are still among my favorites. I loved them so much. Book 7 was not my favorite. It's probably actually one of my least favorites that we've read so far, but I still love the series and I'm still eager to continue. Cannot wait. You've heard me blab on and on about Keeper of the Lost Cities many times. I love that series so much. Number 3 is a new release that has come out this year that you haven't yet read, but you really want to. And I actually have one out from the library. I have a couple books out from the library that are on my new release or like anticipated releases list. But one that I'm very excited for is called The Mad Girls of New York by Maya Rodell. This is a story of Nellie Bly. She goes undercover at Blackwell's Island. She wants to be a reporter, is having a really difficult time getting kind of a leg in the newspaper industry. It's mostly men. None of the editors are really willing to give her a shot. And she kind of weasels her way into this opportunity, makes this opportunity up for herself, and goes undercover at Blackwell's Island, where it's an insane asylum, but often women are sent there who their families or their husbands or parents just want to kind of get rid of them because of their outspoken opinions, or they can't be forced into submission, or they have some other kind of mental illness that's not necessarily asylum worthy. Which, is there ever anything that's asylum worthy? That's a discussion for another day. But many women are sent here to Blackwell's Island, and situation on the island, the way that these women are cared for is very bleak. And she kind of puts herself in that position in order to write about it from the inside. I cannot wait to read that. So that is at the top of my library stack right now. Number 4 is my most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I recently, very recently, just put out a video for my anticipated reads for July, August, and September. Honestly, I haven't looked much into October, November, December. However, there's one book that comes out in September that I did not have on that list. I have it slated for October to December, but it got moved up and I didn't know that. And that is the third book in Frederick Bachman's Beartown trilogy. So Beartown and Us Against You, I absolutely loved. And the third book, The Winners, comes out on September 27th, I believe. So I'm very, very eager to read that third installment of that trilogy. I love Frederick Bachman. You will see him in this list in a few minutes. He's fantastic. One of my favorite authors. He's not for everybody. I know he's not everybody's cup of tea, but I really loved about everything that I've read from him. Even the ones that started out a little weird or slow, by the end, I was 100% in. So I'm very excited for The Winners. Number 5 is my biggest disappointment so far this year. And sadly, I have an Amy Harmon that I did not like. I don't even actually own it anymore. I've already sold it on Pango Books. And that is the songbook. I always say the love song. The songbook of Benny Lament. This was my 4th or 5th Amy Harmon book, and the first one that I really just did not care for. I think it had too much in it. It took place in the 1960s, and it dealt with the music scene at that time, like the start of Motown, recording companies, and the music scene. But it also had mobsters and race relations and like the civil rights movement that was going on during that time. And our main protagonists were a Black woman who was a singer and a little Spitfire, and an Italian man whose family was a part of the Italian mafia. So it just had all of these elements in it. And I normally love books that involve music. So I was very hopeful, but I just didn't care for either of our main protagonists. I was super irritated at how many times it mentioned that the female was petite and tiny and a little itty bitty thing. Like they even wrote a song about her being an itty bitty thing and with a big personality. I don't know. I just, as a not so itty bitty woman, I just get irritated. Like, I get it. We know she's tiny. She's petite. That's fine. I don't mind reading about petite protagonists, but when it's mentioned every single time she came up in the book, it was talked about how small she was. And I just didn't care for that. So there's a lot of things. It was a big disappointment because I have some of my favorite books ever are Amy Harmon books that I've really loved in the last couple of years. And so I was very hopeful for this one, and it just kind of let me down. It was a bummer. That could have also been my answer for number 6, which was my biggest surprise. Because of how much I've loved some of Amy Harmon's books in the past, I was really hopeful for this one. And I think that is the same kind of feel that I have for the answer for this one of biggest surprise of the year. It's kind of a negative surprise. And that is The Silent Sister by Diane Chamberlain. I didn't mind this book while I was reading it, but I have read some Diane Chamberlain that are just spectacular. Necessary Lies, Big Lies in a Small Town, The Dream Daughter. These are some that are more recent books of hers, and I've absolutely loved them. This one is quite backlist. I think it came out in 2014, so it's a number of years ago. And the storytelling is still very good. The fact that she kept me invested and kept me wanting to read throughout the story is important. That's very good. But as I look back on it, I really didn't like any of the characters, and I didn't like the decisions, and I didn't like the points that she was trying to make. There was a lot about this that I didn't care for, and that was a bit of a surprise because, again, of how much I have loved other Diane Chamberlain books. So yeah, that was a surprise. I was much more hopeful that I would really like it, and I just didn't. So that's going in my unhaul pile. Number 7 is my favorite new to you or debut author. And I'm doing a new to me author. That is Mike Gale. I read in January All the Lonely People. Obviously, I'm holding it up right now. And then I learned that he has quite a backlist of books, which is very exciting to me because I really loved this story. This is another one that I feel has flown under the radar a bit. I heard about it on the Currently Reading podcast. Katie brought this book to the show, and then she also did an interview with Mike Gale. And after hearing that interview, I'm like, I absolutely need to read this book. And thankfully, my patrons agreed, and this is the choice that we read for our book club, I think in January this year. And I just loved it so much. We have an older man who we follow this older man who has dealt with some grief in his life. We get his backstory and his romance with his wife. And he's kind of isolated himself completely. But then there's this pesky neighbor who weasels her way into his life and his heart and broadens his horizons quite a bit. And it's just beautiful. It's definitely a book that you kind of want to hug at the end, and I absolutely loved it. And so I'm really excited that Mike Gale does have so many other books on his backlist, because he's an author that I would like to keep my eye out for and potentially read more of his books. So, favorite new author, that's the one that I chose. I probably could have chosen a bunch, but I'm going with Mike Gale. Number 8 is a newest fictional crush, and we're just going to ignore that question because I really don't get crushes on characters. Even when I read romance books, it's very rare that I get swoony over characters. I enjoy them when I'm reading it, but they're forgettable, and I don't really think about them afterwards. And so, yeah, no fictional crushes for me. But number 9 is a newest favorite character, and I will just say I am 1000% Team Keith in these books. If you know, you know. I know many of you have started reading this series, and I have really loved the character of Keith, who is one of Sophie's friends. She's part of this friend group who have all been working together throughout the series. And I really love learning about his backstory. I love his personality. I love his sense of humor. I love the way that he is so loyal, and the way that he, even when he is impulsive and makes poor decisions, my heart just goes out to him. I love Team Keith. I'm 100% till the end of time. # Team Keith. Please tell me, for those of you also reading this series, do you love Keith as much as I do? Number 10 is a book that made you cry. And easily I could have given you a list of probably 15 books that made me cry. I chose 2 that I've read relatively recently that I sobbed. I sobbed. The first one is, I still can't find the cover of this. I think I found it at one point and then I lost it again. This is And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer. This is a little novella. Here's the title. Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Frederick Bachman. It's a short little novella. I listened to this on my way to Washington, D.C. to meet up with a friend like a month and a half ago or so. And I had to pull myself together by the end of this because I was weeping. Bachman just has a way with words that in this short little novella, which is about 3 generations in this family, in particular, a grandfather and his grandson, but the dad does have an impact as well, does have a part of the story as well. And the grandfather is struggling with dementia, ultimately. I don't really need to say more than that because it is such a short little book. It's 100% worth the read, but it was very heartwarming at times, just the relationships in this family, but also, whew, it was a doozy. It did me in by the end. And then just recently I read The 100 Years of Lenny and Margot by Marianne Cronin. I think I cried 3 or 4 times throughout this story. I've talked about it recently. It's one of my 5-star predictions, so I'll be talking about it again when I wrap up that list of 5 books. But Lenny is a 17-year-old girl living on a terminal ward in a hospital, and Margot is in her 80s. She's 83. They become friends and decide through this art program at the hospital, they're going to create a piece of artwork that represents each of their 100 lives, because together they've lived 100 years, not lives, years. Lenny, I just love her. She befriends the chaplain at the hospital, has some really good conversations with the chaplain, really kind of pushes him on his faith, but because she's dealing with being in this terminal ward and why is this happening to me, and really kind of struggling with these questions herself. I love that she and this 83-year-old woman connect and form this really strong bond of friendship. As they make art together, they tell each other stories of their lives. So we get to know about their backstories and their family history. And Margot in particular, her husband, and she grew up in World War II during that time period and what that was like for her. My word, this book, I cried a lot. Okay, a book that made you happy. I'm going to say this one, A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Elbis. This is not a laugh out loud book, but it does have a charm to it. we follow this sibling group of 3 children whose grandmother dies very early on in the book, and their lawyer encourages them to be sent out of town in London during the Blitz to find a family in the country who potentially could become their family. Like, what lawyer does that, first of all? But these 3 kids are all readers, different types of readers, but I love that. And they befriend, when they're out in the countryside, they have a really hard time with the families that they've been billeted with, but they befriend this librarian who is also kind of ostracized by the town, as are many of the kids who were sent out of London. It's not a happy-go-lucky ha-ha book, but it's just so sweet. It has the feel of a classic. It's heartwarming, it's heart-wrenching at times, but it just, by the end, made me very happy with the outcome. Were things wrapped up in a little red bow? Yeah, but it's a middle grade, so I'm down with that. I'm actually always down with a big red bow at the end of a story. I loved it, and I was happy that I finally read it. I was happy that it had been gifted to me. Thank you, Rainey. And everything about this made me happy. So I'm counting that. It didn't say book that made you laugh. It said book that made you happy. So I think it counts. Number 12 is the most beautiful book that you've received or bought this year. This one was easy. This came to mind right away when I read this question. And it's The Last Quintista by Donna Barbo Higuera. I got this before the Newbery sticker was on there. Yay, because this is the Newbery winner from this year. But I'm really glad that this cover is not lessened by a big gold Newbery sticker. I just think this is totally my aesthetic when it comes to books. I love these busy, almost symmetrical. This one's not quite symmetrical, but it just has all of these designs. The back is gorgeous. And friends, it's a printed hardcover. Like, there's this snake. It's so pretty. It's so pretty. I think it's stunning. So pretty. And then number 13 is the last question, and it is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? I mean, have you seen my shelves? Lots of books. But one goal that I have for the last few years is I choose a couple of authors where I own multiple books of theirs, but haven't yet read any. And I feel like I haven't done so great with that so far this year. So I just need to read a book by Jennifer Ciavarini, maybe The Spy Mistress, historical fiction that takes place right here in Richmond. So I'm very interested in it, but I have quite a few now Jennifer Ciavarini books on my shelves. Need to read one. And also Jennifer Robson is another author that I would really like to read. The Gown is one that has been highly, highly, highly recommended to me, and I really would love to read it. So those are 2 authors that I would like to read before the end of the year. I mean, I also need to make more progress on some series. I've not been doing great with that. I need to make progress on my book of the month shelf. I've been making really good progress on my book cart where all my recommendations are from the year. I've not been doing great on my Christmas book exchange shelf. So yeah, I mean, I have a lot of books that I would love to read by the end of the year, but those 2 authors are kind of high priorities for me. That is the end of this tag. I'm not going to tag anyone because it's been going around. If you want to do it, do it. Consider yourself tagged if you'd like to. It's just a fun way to take a look at my reading this year and see some highlights and some lowlights along the way. I would love to hear from you. What's been your biggest surprise book this year? I love that question because surprise can be in a positive or negative way. And I just would love to hear what book has surprised you this year. Let's talk about it down in the comments or about any of these other questions. I would love to hear some of your answers. And I just always love talking with you down there. So let's chat in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you spending some time with me here today. I look forward to talking with you soon in another video. Bye.